Hello, class. It's Miss Roberts here. And tonight, or today, if you're watching me in the daytime, we're going to discuss additional theories in interpersonal communication. This will be rounding out our modules based on interpersonal communication before we dive into public speaking later on in a couple weeks. So let's go ahead and begin. So, per usual, my little mini screen will be jumping around so I can make sure to show the content, but let's talk about interpersonal communication. Well, interpersonal communication is communication between people as part of a close and irreplaceable relationship that they treat each other as unique individuals. So these usually fall under the umbrella of friendships, romantic partners, and family. If you decide to take this as a standalone class, it's really interesting because we go over different interpersonal communication theories, talk about how interpersonal communication connects with other parts of communication theory, and then how to specifically talk to these main groups. All right, so how do we form interpersonal communication and relationships? So this might not apply to all different types of interpersonal communication. So for example, friendships are distinct from family relationships and of course very distinct from romantic partnerships and those bonds. But we might base it on appearance. So someone might look attractive, so we might decide to get in a romantic partnership with them, or we might like their personal style and want to be their friend. They might have similar interests, or it might be an opposites attract sort of thing where you're drawn together because you're different from one another, and anybody can be drawn to each other, want to be friends based on different differences, and those differences work together. Then we have reciprocal attraction, so this for romantic partnerships where they're both attracted to each other. Then we have competence where we are drawn to people who are smart or who are very capable. But sometimes it can be a drawback because if someone is too capable or too admirable, then we might back up a little bit. So there's a little bit of a balancing act there. Then we have disclosure. So we disclose our personal information to our trusted significant others. So when we think about the other chapter, significant others, is not just romantic partnerships, but it's also people who mean a lot to us. So these can also include family and friends. We are closest to people that we're around and that we see often. And then finally, we form interpersonal relationships based on the rewards or the good things we get from our relationship is greater than the cost or the downsides of that relationship. Speaking of which, when we weigh relationships based on cost and rewards, we are engaging in the social exchange theory. That's when we seek out people who can give us more rewards that are greater or equal to the costs we encounter in dealing with them. So, rewards can be the good feelings that we feel when being around them, when they give us gifts, when how we feel when we give them gifts, closeness, the growth of our bond, of their bond with people. But of course, there's costs because all that gift giving costs money. It might cost time. It might cost effort. So if the rewards outweigh the cost, I have a tendency to, or an incentive to, stay and maintain the interactions and the relationship. Then we have different messages. So content and relational messages are two types of messages we can engage in interpersonal relationships. So, content messages are the messages that are about information, and relational messages are based on the social relationship and the emotions of that message. Then we have affinity, the degree in which people appreciate each other, so how close and how much they like each other. Immediacy is expression of interest and engagement. There's verbal and nonverbal immediacy, so when people get closer, when people touch, when people hug, when people express happiness and joy when engaging with their significant others. Not significant others, just romantic partners, but people who are close to them. I'm going to start saying that from now on. But there are three main groups. So the three main groups are family, friends, and romantic partners. Then there's respect, the degree in which a person holds esteem for another, regardless if they like them. So even if people are having a disagreement or a fight, they still behave with a base level of decorum to honor them and to maintain face. If you remember the cultural chapter where we talk about face work, in communication studies, we think about our personal impression management and managing impression of others as face work. So respect is a part of that face work. Then control, the amount of influence one has over others. All right. So we have the social penetration theory. This is a really interesting theory because this involves disclosure. Disclosure is one of the cornerstones of interpersonal communication because there are groups that we do disclose to, but we're very careful about, for example, what you would say to a student or a teacher. Um, Maybe a doctor will know personal things about you, but they don't have that close relationship with you. Maybe when you first meet someone, that disclosure and getting to know your face, maybe you'll get to know each other on a very surface level, but as the relationship continues, as the friendship continues, then those questions and that knowledge deepen. So, speaking about depth, those are one of the two dimensions of the social penetration theory. It's developing a relationship, a progression from the periphery to the model to its center. So, in the next slide, we're going to see what that looks like. The breadth is the amount of information shared. So, for example, your hobbies, interests, I guess values on a surface level, zodiac sign, what's your major, just information that you would share freely. But depth is information that you don't share as freely to others. So I'm going to put myself in this little corner right here. It's a little bit stretched here, but you see there is a circle and there are different layers or different levels to each portion. So for example, the breadth of information is the amount of information here, but how deep it goes to the center, like the more vulnerable parts of information about us, depends. So, for example, academic life is a little bit deeper than things about appearance or career ambitions. It just depends on each person. Disclosure does have risk. So, for example, if you're sharing vulnerable information, then you have to trust that the person would respect and do right by the information being told, and vice versa. So building that trust and getting and letting people to the center of who you are, or close to the center of who you are as possible, can help in the development of interpersonal relationships. Then there's the Johari window. I'm always very fascinated by this window. It's a very simplistic theory. I really like it. But there are four ways or four different types of disclosure. So first is open. So it's information that's known to self and known to others. Totally open. That's information you share freely. And of course, if you share information from the other ones, then it goes here. So information doesn't have to stay in this place, right? But then we have blind. So there is information that is not known to self but known to others. So there might, for example, there might be information about yourself that you don't know about yourself, maybe characteristics that you don't necessarily see in yourself, like resilience or perseverance that others see in you, but until is known to you, then that information is in the blind section. But then there's the third type of window, and it's pretty simple to understand because we all have our secrets. We have information about ourselves that we don't disclose to others. And if the information is known to self but not known to others, it is hidden. Here is the most fascinating part about the Johari window. As a nosy person, I really like number four. And this includes me. I'm part of this as well. But there's information about yourself and about myself that you don't know and nobody else knows. But it's there. And that's a crazy thought to me. But that's why I would like this particular theory. But maybe some of those characteristics or information come out to yourself or to others, or maybe just come out into the open. So maybe, for instance, once you're faced with a situation, how you handle that situation, your perseverance, for example, or how you handle a situation will then become known to you. But if haven't been put in that situation, you don't know how you're going to react. So that's just one example of what can be in the unknown. But yeah, I find that super fascinating. There's parts of us that are unknown to ourselves and others, but that are there and that can come up to the surface eventually. All right, so let's talk about friendships. All right. So friendships are really special. I hope you have close friends with you or in your life. I have friendships in my life as well, and I really like them and honor them. I'm really grateful to have my friendships. And I like talking about friendships because I find friendships very fascinating. I find this topic fascinating actually. But friendships, when I first started teaching interpersonal communication, intercultural communication, well, yeah, intercultural, sorry, interpersonal communication and fundamentals of communication and intercultural to some extent. I found it fascinating because friendships are just based on an agreement. Think about it. Let's look at the definition. Friendship is a voluntary relationship that provides social support. They're more of egalitarian and can be larger in number. So think about why your friend is a friend. Now, don't include family members that you have stronger bonds and you're like, oh, my sister's my friend. We're not talking about that. That's your sister, right? No offense, right? But we're talking about people that are not related to you by blood or by marriage at all. And then, of course, romantic partner, that's my best friend. Yeah, we know. But we're not talking about them either. We're going to talk about them later. I'm talking about people that you're not related to by marriage or by law or by adoption. And people who you are not in romantic partnerships with. And that's the fascinating part. You're just together with your friends because you communicate and you agree that these are my people purely on that. It's not that you're born or adopted into or married into that family or you don't have the complications, I should say, of romantic partnership. You're just friends because you're friends. And I think that's a beautiful thing. But friendships are so wide and various, right? So we have our close friends, acquaintances, and online friends, and friends from different states. So it's friendship as a concept is super fascinating. So let's go ahead and continue to talk about the different types of friendships. So we have short versus long term friends, task versus maintenance oriented friends. So, for example, you might form friendships and bonds in the classroom, and then it'll be up to you to maintain those bonds in the class. But then maintenance friends are friends that aren't related to work or school at all. Low disclosure versus high disclosure. So you might have cool friendships that people you hang out with and you're cool with, but you might not tell them your deepest darkest secrets or nothing in the Jari window, for example. But you have other friends who know everything about you. Then you have low versus high obligation. So you have friends that you're cool with and you might help out occasionally, but they're not the people that if they call you at 2 a.m., you're there. And I have friends that I'll do that for. And I have friends that'll do that for me. Like, oh man, you're in trouble? All right. Get in the car, get some coffee. We're driving. We're going to see what's going on. Okay. Then we have frequent versus infrequent nope. Let me go back. Frequent versus infrequent contact. There you go. I have to slow myself down a little bit. Then in person versus mediated. So when we're talking about mediated communication, we're talking about those online pals versus in person. All right, let me go ahead and talk about, speaking about family, let's talk about parenting styles. So I was first introduced to parenting styles as a theory in my psychology class and developmental psychology class. It was really interesting. I don't have children, but I was somebody's child. So it's really interesting examining how I was raised versus how other people were raised, and if I ever do have children, how I will raise them. So here are some of the categories of parenting styles, and of course, it falls on a spectrum and it can be situational. So we have authoritarian versus authoritative. So, authoritarian are parents that are strict and demanding and they expect unquestioning obedience. So, what I say goes, I pay the bills, I'm the parent, you're the child situation. Then you have authoritative, where the parents are firm, clear, and strict, but they encourage communication and provide that flexibility. Finally, we have permissive parents, which don't require children to follow rules. And if you're a kid, it's like, yay, no rules. But in order to operate in a society with a bunch of rules, a parent's job is to provide that structure and rules. And even though a kid would never admit it, a kid craves that structure because they're brand new people. They don't know everything that their parents know. So, in essence, it's ideal to be a mixture of that authoritarian, and permissive style. Have that flexibility of the authoritative parent, where they follow that firm structure, but allow their kids chance to make mistakes and have that open communication with them. Then we have sibling relationships. Those of us who are lucky to have at least one sibling, there you go. I laugh because if you have that sibling relationship, it can vary. I only have one sibling, so I don't have the experience of having more than one sibling. But when I ask people, people talk about how there's different relationships between siblings. They might have a favorite sibling. You can't tell anybody they have a family favorite sibling. But here are some of the ways that siblings interact with each other. So we have supportive, so we have regular talks, and they consider themselves to be successful. That's the sibling that is your friend, right? So we made a distinction in the couple of slides just because I wanted to talk about how the uniqueness of friendship on its own without being related to the person. But it's awesome when siblings consider each other friends as well. That's a really beautiful thing. Then we have longing, so they have admiration and respect for one another. Sometimes it can turn into envy, but sometimes it can just be just straight up admiration for who they are. So for example, I have one sibling. He is autistic, and it's a little bit different because I'm more in the caregiver role. But one of the things I do admire about him that he's like really organized and he's a very naturally type A person, and I'm a naturally type B person, like our mom. So it's like when he organizes or when he just does things in a very direct and cool way. I always admired that about my brother. He's very methodical and succinct, and I'm like, oh, okay. A little bit loosey goosey with some of the processes there, and I'm trying to be more like him, just be more organized. That's what I admire about him. But then there is competition because parental resources and attention are scarce, and sometimes there is a competition for respect and love from the siblings. So each sibling deals with that a little bit differently, but hopefully, it happens. It's normal. Okay? Pardon me. Excuse me. All right. Next, we have apathetic. So siblings in a situation don't have a relationship, might have grown up in different households, or they might be really super far in age, but they don't really hang out with each other. They love each other, but they might have closer bonds with other people. And then they're straight up hostile. They might harbor animosity and anger and stop communicating. So, sibling relationships and parental relationships are very complicated. Now we're going to talk about romance. Well, kind of. So, caveat in the natural relational development model, it can apply to friendships. It gets a little iffy with bonding because we don't have a friendship ceremony in our culture. But I like to talk about this in a romantic partnership context because it's just straight to the point and makes a little bit more sense. But just a disclaimer, this can also apply to friendships. I'm going to go over the diagram first. I really like this diagram because think about the parts as part of a Venn diagram too. So I like the steps in the Venn diagram. So these parts are the coming together phase. So that's when people meet and develop their romantic partnership. Then we have relational maintenance. So they kind of go back and forth between integrating, separating, and it's a normal part of the relational development process. But then, if there's trouble in paradise and it doesn't get fixed or doesn't get resolved, then the relationship ends, it comes apart, or they just stay in the avoiding stage forever. So let's talk about each step, and then I'll go over the slides talking about each step. So first, we initiate. That's you have to meet the other person, whether it be online or in person. You got to know they exist and you have to know that you exist or it's not going to work. So you initiate contact and then you're like, this person's cute. Or I like their vibe. I like what they're talking about. So this is the experimenting phase. Now, this is the phase where you're either going to make it or break it, which is kind of similar to avoiding. If you notice that these steps are the polar opposite of these steps, so I always find this interesting in a way where you like that part. But in this part, you're together for a while and you're trying to figure out where to stay or go. This part, with the experimenting part, you're not saying if you're going to stay or you're going to go. It's just super easy because you don't know each other yet. So that's when you ask, there's more questions. You're trying to feel like, should I know this person a little bit more? Should I not? What's going on? But if you do, then it becomes intense. So, for those of us who've ever experienced romantic partnerships or observed people in that lovey dovey first phase part, that's when you hang out a lot with each other and you get to know each other and you're very excited. You're sharing that, oh, I found my new boo. It's a beautiful thing. The intensifying part is the awesome part of a relationship, but it doesn't last forever. Those butterflies, that limerence, those feelings and intense chemical reactions from being around this person can't last forever. You can't just be in a manic love phase for the rest of your life. But that calms down and you integrate into each other's lives, maybe meet each other's families, friend groups start hanging out with each other, start sharing pictures of each other on social media if that's what you choose to do. But this person goes from stranger to being a really big part of your life. Then we have the bonding phase. So you gotta get married now. It's the rules. Just kidding. So when this was created, bonding was synonymous with marriage, but nowadays people choose to cohabitate. They might get married, might form domestic partnerships. So it's taking on a more varied role than initially thought. But bonding is like moving together and just being a part of each other's worlds. Then we have differentiating. So, as much as we're coming together and we are a unit as a couple, this couple is still two individuals, and it's okay. So, that's why on the Venn diagram here is in the coming apart stage, relational stage, all those. So, with the differentiating stage, you still hang out with your own friends, you still have your own hobbies, and you are by yourself sometimes, and that's okay because you're by yourself, you come together, and you're having that healthy balance between I and we. But sometimes life gets in the way, Think about if it's a romantic couple, they decide to have a family, the children take up a lot of the time, or work takes a lot of the time, or being at school takes a lot of the time. So sometimes they come apart a little bit. Now, it's in the beginning stages of coming apart, but in the later stages of relational maintenance because it happens to the best of us. As long as there's communication and you're getting your way back to these sections, then it should be fine. But it can also mean trouble in paradise to where it's stagnant. The problems just keep going on and not being resolved. So they haven't broken up yet. Now we're firm in the coming apart stage. It can get better, but both partners have to work hard at it. Possibly go to therapy or couples therapy just to see what's going on. Can they go back to where they are? Sure. But it's going to take a lot more work than in the circumscribing phase. But then we go into the avoiding phase. When I first showed this diagram, I said that sometimes people can be in the avoiding phase forever. Let's talk about bonding. Let's talk about marriage. So, some people might be married on paper but live completely separate lives. So, until they divorce, then they might still be in that avoiding stage. Or it might be one of those couples that live together but they're in separate rooms and they live separate lives, but rent's so high that they can't move out on their own. Situations like that where they're not romantically involved, but something's still keeping them together. But then eventually the talk has to happen. And like I said before, the interesting part of this diagram is like the initial parts are like the exact opposite. So the coming together from coming apart. So just like in the avoiding experimenting phase is easy to exit, initiating just didn't know the person at all. Now you're terminating and breaking up. So let's go ahead and just take a couple of looks at the slides and take a deeper dive into the steps. But I like using the diagram to initially explain all of them because I really like this diagram. And it pretty much shows how relationships go up, down, and can break apart. All right, so the initiate phase again is just you're interested in making contact and you're demonstrating that you're worth talking to, very superficial stage. So I'm a child of the 90s and I shouldn't have been watching this comedian when I was young, but I did. So it reminds me of a Chris Rock joke when he said, when you're initially something to the effect of when you're initially meeting someone, especially to date, you're not meeting them, you're meeting their representative. And I didn't understand what he was talking about back then because, again, I was too young to be watching that comedy special. However, as an adult, I'm like, yeah, totally right. It's almost like first dates and job interviews have some things in common. You're dressing up, you're doing your best, you change your voice to make it very sweet or very, very macho, depending on who you are, and you're showing the best of yourself. And it's the opening stage of all relationships. And if that works, you go to the experimenting section. So you have small talk, talk about commonalities, talk about shared interests. You're auditioning to be the boo thing. In this context, remember this can also be applied to friends. So you're trying to figure out, hey, do I want to hang around this person long term? And just safe ways to ease in and out of the relationship. If in that experimental phase you're like, I'm not feeling this person, then you can go out. There's no emotional investment at all. Versus the avoiding stage is nothing but emotional investment, but they're just over it. Then it gets intense. So that's that lovey-dovey, hard eyes phase, and this person can't do any wrong. Limerence is all happening where this person is the moon and stars, and you want to think about them all the time. It's that emotional excitement and euphoria. This is my favorite phase, but you can't just be crazy like that forever. So you have to calm it down a little bit, and that's okay because it's that first intense version of love that can grow into a more steady version of love. Then we have integrating your social unit and your social circles merge, and you develop these routine rituals like movie night and bowling Sundays and sushi Saturdays and all those types of things. Your sense of obligation grows towards this person because that is your person. You might go social media official, but nowadays people have different views on that. Versus in my day, when social media started kicking off, people are like, oh, you have to put me on your social media. But when I ask students, some people are like, oh, well, I prefer to keep things more quiet. And I definitely respect both decisions. So let's move myself down a little bit. There I go. All right, but then we're bonding. So it's symbolic public gestures to show the world that your relationship exists. Moving in together, marriage, engagement, share written or verbal pledge. It doesn't have to be romantic to achieve this bonding. So I guess for our friendship version, BFFs forever. Matching tattoos of any kind. And it's an important turning point because it acknowledges that stability. It's the apex of the model. Okay. But then there's differentiating. Like I said before, even though differentiating is on that coming apart section of the model, is still a normal part of relational maintenance because we are still trying to figure out, okay, this is our identity as a couple, but then I am still my own individual within that couple. So it's still a normal part of relational maintenance, and it's okay. But things get a little bit hectic with circumscribing, reduced contact and interest, and sometimes life gets busy, or it could be an indicator of romantic issues. It just depends. Now, it happens to the best of us, and we, like I said before, we can't be in that love limerence stage forever. So it's kind of the polar opposite of that. But as long as the couples communicate, get that spark back, they should be okay. But if the behavior continues, then we go into stagnation. So it's a hollow of its former self. The couples are unenthusiastic and have no sense of joy or novelty. Really, really sad part of the relationship. Like I said before, if the romantic partnership gets to that level, it's on the way to going out, but both people in the partnership have to fight their way back to where they were. Couples therapy might be a part of that. But when people don't go to therapy, they might start to avoid. So they might create distance, physical and or emotional. They might express detachment, they zone out, they ignore the other person, and maybe show antagonism towards the person. So once this happens, it's just better to go. They might mentally dissociate, not thinking about the person, and a vicious cycle develops until they terminate. So it's a summary that the relationship has come to its conclusion. Can be long, it can be drawn out, but if a relationship ends, let it be a learning experience. Think about the good times, and just with that experience, know what you want in the next relationship. So let's talk about love languages. We might have heard this going around on TikTok or going around on the social medias. So let's talk about languages of love. How do we show affection and how we show that we care? So I have words of affirmation, so that I love yous and the praises and the compliments, increase quality time. So time might be a way for people to show their love, or straight up gifts. I like gifts. Straight up gifts and money to say, hey, happy birthday. I love you. Acts of service. So acts of service can be like help around the house, chores, favors, things that people can do to make the other person's life easier. Then we have physical touch, kissing, touching, hugging, dot, dot, dot. Okay, I'm going to go back a little bit. So in this diagram, here are some examples. words of affirmation, physical touch, and this is like how to communicate those things to others. But I like how it talks about actions to take and things to avoid. So, for example, for people who like words of affirmation, not complimenting them or not saying thank you, appreciate effort is a no no. For people who like physical touch, to affirm love, neglect, abuse, not touching, that's a no no. And enthusiastic gift receiving or forgetting special occasions are not very good for people who like gifts. And giving gifts as a way to share love, quality time, so not spending time together is a way to not make a quality time person happy. And then acts of service, not following through on small tasks for those who share and give and like to receive love through acts of service. Make sure that you follow through on those commitments. All right. So we have relational dialectics. A dialectic are two situations, circumstances that can happen at the same time. So, for example, we have the integration and separation dialectic, stability versus change dialectic, and expression versus privacy dialectic. So, these are dialectics in interpersonal relationships, and they fall on the spectrum. So, these two forces, situations that we might want simultaneously, but we can't have them at the same time. So, we have the connection versus autonomy dialectic and inclusion versus seclusion dialectic. So, we want to be by excuse me, we want to be by ourselves sometimes, but we also crave connection and community with others. Then we have stability versus change dialectic. This also falls on the spectrum. What part of our relationship is predictable and routine, and what some of the new experiences we can experience, and what are some parts of the relationship that are conventional to like everyone else's, and what parts of the relationship that are unique to them. Then we have expression and privacy dialectic. So, for example, speaking about disclosure, how much information do you want to share with the other person? What information do you want to keep to yourself, and how much? And what types of information do you want to share and keep? All right. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me. Of course, if you have any questions, let me know. We just went over different interpersonal communication theories. If you want to take the class, there's a standalone class that you can take if you're interested in getting to know your most important people a lot better. Well, thank you so much and have a good evening or have a good day if you're watching this in the day. Alrighty, bye.